Hello, I'm here today with a drum machine, a classic 909, which is being sequenced by the Circuit Rhythm, along with a plethora of pedals that I think will sound really great with these 909 sounds. In particular, pedals that deal with saturation or some level of distortion or fuzz. In fact, a rundown of the pedals we're going to be using today, in no particular order. JHS Pedals Colorbox V2, Chase Bliss Audio's Clean, Red Panda Bitmap version 2, Meris Ottobit Jr, Boss OD200, as well as Empress Zoia. A few shoutouts in this video before we even get started. The Voodoo Lab Pedal Power 3. This is the best tool for powering a pedal board like this, or possibly even a bigger pedal board. It's just the cleanest and most efficient way of having a clean setup like this. And so who makes this very cute small pedal board? It's made by Pedal Train and the model is the Metro 24. They also offer bigger models as well if you have more pedals. And there's just a lot of gear in this video. If you like the sound of any of the gear in particular, besides this 909, go check out Sweetwater. They'll definitely have what you need. I'm going to give you a little crash course on like distortion, fuzz, overdrive terminology. Of course, if you're already familiar with all these terminologies, or if you just like to skip over them and go straight into the pedal examples, you can absolutely do that by using the chapters linked in the description of this video. We'll essentially break down the ingredients that make these pedals. So that being saturation, like I said, overdrive, and fuzz, which will all react differently to drums or anything really. All types of distortion happen when the physical components of an electrical circuit are overloaded. So saturation is a more subtle type of distortion, often referred to as soft clipping, that can import warmth and character to your signal. The term is frequently used when describing the effects of tape recordings surpassing the 0 decibel threshold, which also causes the signal to be slightly compressed. The term overdrive is not too dissimilar from saturation, but it's associated with the way guitar amplifiers sound and respond to high-level signals. The term distortion, in its most literal meaning, is a more aggressive type of saturation that utilizes hard clipping to radically alter the audio signal that it's fed. Some circuits can go from overdrive to distortion by just increasing the amount of signal fed into the circuit. The more distorted the signal gets, the more compressed it is. Fuzz applies extremely hard clipping on the signal, so much so that it transforms it into a square wave. Fuzzy tones are normally ultra compressed, losing all of the performance subtleties, which can sound cool in some contexts. Another distortion technique that is gaining traction these days, both in pedal and regular synthesis, is wavefolding. Explaining how this technique works will take us into some pretty geeky territory, so to quote Wikipedia, it's an audio synthesis effect where waveforms that exceed a maximum volume are folded back onto themselves, rather simply than being clipped. In this video, we'll also find some pedals that do bit crushing, which was actually covered more in depth in the video about lo-fi pedals. Bit crushing often goes hand in hand with sample reduction, but neither is a type of distortion, although they kind of sound that way. They consist of reducing the bits and sample rate of the input signal, which generates more or less extreme artifacts that make the sound more lo-fi and compressed in a way, which is reminiscent of that sort of almost Nintendo-y 8-bit generated by early sound cards and vintage video games. Another very important term in this overview is harmonics. As you may or may not know, any proper distortion causes the generation of higher harmonics. You can hear this clearly when distorting a single low frequency wave. Add a heavy distortion or a fuzz to it and the signal will also become a lot brighter because upper octave harmonics will be generated. And we can get an idea of how this concept works right now actually, using the lovely Novation Bass Station 2. We'll keep it real simple here. I have one oscillator here on my bass, and this is what it sounds like. There's lots going on in the high end of this particular bass, so let's actually just pull the frequency down to something like this. And then the bass station does happen to have distortion as well as overdrive in the unit. So let's see what happens when we turn that up. Just that right there is a very clear example of harmonics and distortion. You could of course treat this the exact same way through an effects pedal and you get like a sort of different flavor of harmonics and distortion, of course, depending on the pedal that you're using. So that's a rundown, but how does this all apply to drums, considering that drums are not melodic? Well, actually, in a way they are, and you could definitely make the argument, especially with electronic drum machines, that they are tonal instruments. So for example, on a 909, pretty much every drum has a tuning knob. And these drums react at least partially in a similar way that, let's say, an electric guitar would, but usually with a stronger transient, much less release time, so maybe comparable to like a plucky guitar, and obviously not just one transient at a time, layered transients over top of each other. And so the entire point of this video is to explore that. So let's start with JHS Pedals Colorbox V2, which is mono in, mono out. You can't see this, but on the side there's an option for XLR or 1/4 inch in and out. So it's a very versatile pedal in that way. You could even use it on like your vocal, on a mic if you want, which I think is a really important thing to mention just like right up front. You don't usually see that with effects pedals. Up top we have this like preamp / gain section with a high pass filter, which we could switch on or off with this switch right here. And it gets really loud. I used to own a Neve 1073 DPA, which is like studio grade, great quality preamp. Even just in design, this definitely reminds me of that. And also the amount of volume that you get from it. It also reminds me of the Neves. I've set the volume from my 909 pretty low. So this is before and after. Take off that high pass. Okay, so I just want to make sure that my volumes are more or less the same. Okay, so now from there's this like step component, and this is where you get tons of volume, some overdrive perhaps. It's just right away. Sounds so good. I should mention that this is mono. If you wanted to get the full like stereo experience with this pedal, you'd actually have to get 2 of them, but 2 of them would be a killer combination. And of course below that we have EQ as well. Let's just play around with that just to give a feel here. This is kind of where I had it set before. Maybe I want more mids, like a super mid kind of lo-fi mix with more gain or not. And on the 3rd row below that, we have treble, mid, bass, shift, which is essentially a frequency selector. So if I want to boost the highest of high frequencies, let's say on treble, I would just shift it to 6 o'clock. It's getting a little bit harsh though. And if I wanted to boost, let's say, the lowest of low frequencies, that's how I would do it on bass. And that's called parametric EQ. So to sum it all up, this device is like having a top-notch studio console preamp with a studio-grade 3-way parametric EQ section and a powerful gain stage that can create anything from saturation to fuzz. Next up is the Boss OD200, which, like all Boss pedals, gives you like the meat and potatoes of what you need in whatever effects that you're covering. It's mono in, mono out, and unlike the Colorbox, which is 100% analog, the OD200 is 100% digital. Just considering the names of the presets here, this is a pedal that's clearly geared towards and meant for guitar players. So presets like X Metal, Scream, and Blues. Let's just see what X Metal sounds like on this groove. So this is without X Metal. Here we go. It's pretty sick. And what does Scream sound like? Let's get even more drive on this. This is the pedal in this comparison where you could really step into any direction that you want, whether it's fuzz, overdrive, distortion. The presets really are just laid out in front of us. So going back to Scream, that's what it sounds like on this groove, but there's different types of Scream as well. So let's try the second one. Another one of my absolute favorites on drums is Stack Drive. Let's hear it. It's just absolute dirt. Let's open up the toms. Bring the drive down, which essentially acts as like a mix. We haven't focused on fuzz yet. This pedal gives us an opportunity to do that. So let's scroll over to fuzz, see what that sounds like. Right, so it really is just crushing it. It does give that sort of square wave quality. It's so crushed. Goes without saying that this pedal is a great preset machine and is just super fun to play with on drums. We now have the Chase Bliss Audio Clean. Stereo in, stereo out, fully analog. And at its core, it's actually a compressor, but just like every other Chase Bliss audio pedal, it does a thing, or it is a thing, but then it ends up being a lot more than that thing. There's a whole like customizable switch panel in the back of the pedal, just like many other Chase Bliss audio pedals. I would say that the general concept or idea of this pedal is mainly focused on electric string players, like electric guitar. So for example, when you play the electric guitar through, let's say, an overdrive pedal, the touch response and the dynamic control on your strings becomes like completely different. It becomes a lot more upfront, but at the same time is very much distorted. The idea of clean is to have as much dynamic control or touch response as, let's say, with an overdrive pedal, but with a clean guitar sound. So that's my understanding of the pedal. And so I think we have to get a little bit more creative with it because we're dealing with electronics, which obviously are way less dynamic. And then on top of that, we're dealing with a drum machine, which is arguably the least dynamic instrument, let's say. So how do we make this interesting? First off, on the back panel, I'm going to turn this dusty switch on. So this is without any effects. Let's turn it on. Instantly got that dusty feel. And we can play with the dynamics here. As we push the sensitivity, we have some more reaction coming from the dynamics. I think that's pretty nice right there. Clean has a master limiter at the end of its signal chain, and Dusty turns that limiter into an overdrive. On top of this, you can hit clean as hard as you'd like on the input, so we can really blast this volume, and it just becomes crazier and crazier. Another really interesting thing you could do with drums is essentially use the wet signal as a transient shaper. So I'm going to hit play on the groove. I'll turn my dynamics to pretty high. And we'll find the spot where all we're really getting is transients. And I can play with how quick those transients are with my attack. Right, so now we're really just getting transients. And now I could turn the dry signal up from there. What if I gave this some more volume? So just the transients with the dry signal. Again, we could blast the input if we want, and it just turns into an overdrive. Another kind of gnarly technique you could do here is have your attack all like as short as possible. So now we're just hearing the wet, and then use the EQ, and it becomes this like kind of dirty texture underneath the dry signal. So clean might not be designed specifically for drums, but there's all these little tricks. And by the way, I got a lot of these tricks from Knobs, so shout out to Knobs. Thanks for your information. Then there is the Ottobit Jr, which is mono in, stereo out, and digital. The Ottobit Jr is an interesting one in the context of this video. It falls under the Bitcrusher sample reduction distortion category. So let's hear what that sounds like on this sort of video game, 90s video game sort of Super Nintendo groove. The sample rate reduction is a little bit more subtle as opposed to the Bitcrusher, which we're going to hear in a second. We could add a filter to this if we want. And then let's say this in combo with the bit reduction. So that definitely falls under distortion. That along with tons of sample rate reduction, and we basically have nothing left. So turn it back on. This sounds pretty nostalgic. And then below that, there's this bottom row here as well. So what does this do? Well, we have this stutter function, which gives us little sounds like this. What if we set the stutter to random? So now it's just going to stutter randomly in different subdivisions. I like to use this almost as like a fill function. There's an extra layer to this as well. So we have the filter sequencer on here. So if I just turn the sequencer on, you're going to hear that it sweeps. It filter sweeps. Especially if I set it to random. This is what I usually do. So that, along with sample rate reduction, bit crusher, maybe some stutter over top of that. It becomes like a really nostalgic sounding pedal. Staying in the bit crusher realm, let's check out the Red Panda Bitmap. Also digital stereo in and stereo out. In terms of just distorting a drum sound through bit crushing, this pedal is very straightforward. You just focus on the top row here. We've got mix bit crushing as well as the frequency that we want to bit crush. And then we have this drive knob down here, which works independently from this row. So I'll hit play on this classic drum and bass groove, turn up the drive knob here. Nothing's happening because we need to turn up the mix. Notice that these aren't, they're basically at 0, they're not touched. And still we're getting this distortion. Okay, with the filter. So this is happening independently. I'll bring it down just a little bit. And then of course, if I want to just crush this to the utmost degree, I can do that with bit crusher and then choose the frequency that I want to bit crush. The great thing here is that this is my dry signal, and whatever texture that I've created, you know, on this row and with this drive, I could just mix it into the dry signal, which I think is perfect for drums, because you don't want this all the time with your drums. Maybe you just want a hint of that distortion or bit crushing. On top of that, there's an LFO that we can control in this section right here. So let's turn up the depth of that LFO, and I'll change the wave here. Let's say this one. I mean, that's a bit too crazy. Okay, so I can change the envelope here. Now you can really hear the frequency dipping in and out. Okay, so this along with Ottobit, what would happen now? With stutter? It's cool because it kind of adds like another rhythm over top of an already kind of busy groove. With the LFO dipping in and out, it kind of has that effect. And now let's take a look at a hidden away, but obviously not so hidden away, function of the bitmap, and that is wavefolding. This is actually the only pedal in the comparison where wavefolding is actually possible, so that's something to take note of. And so how do you actually pull that off? Well, if I hit wave, it switches to different types of waves. So let's go to this one, which is the triangle plus the exclamation point. That is the wavefolding option. I'm gonna play my groove from there. Turn this on and then just turn up the drive, and then the depth knob controls the full point. So let's check it out. That's what it sounds like. We can add some filter to this as well if we want. So same thing as before, this is the type of thing that you could sort of mix in there if you want. It doesn't necessarily have to be like your entire drum sound. And I think that's really cool. Next is the Empress Zoia. The Empress Zoia is a digital pedal with stereo in and stereo out. Arguably one of the most complex pedals in the guitar and also synth world. It's a fan favorite for modular folks, so you just know that it's extremely complex. It's an incredibly flexible multi-effects / synth with a modular engine that can also pull off all types of distortion. In short, each of these LED lights can be assigned to an effect or function, including oscillators and samples, and interconnected to create a truly timeless range of sonic possibilities. In terms of fuzz and overdrive, it has a few presets that will just smash these drums into oblivion. And the preset names will give that away. Let's check out this one. It's called Crunch Time. So here's the groove with nothing, and here's with crunch time. With hi-hats. My God. Maybe turn down the decay of that kick, give space for the hi-hats. I love how it becomes like a super linear pattern. So this is without it, and then those hi-hats sort of peek out when they can. Maybe open up the decay of the hi-hats. Whoa. Already these drums are extremely crushed. What if I want them to be even more crushed? All I have to do is turn up the volume. Let's bring it back down. But it's good to know that you have that leeway. You can just give it as much input volume as you want, but the output volume doesn't really change. Or alternatively, you could bring down the input volume. That sounds pretty good like that. I actually like that better. So let's leave it like that. Let's look at some simple controls like tone control. So mid-gain. Let's see. We'll make this a little bit more mid-heavy or maybe less? What if we brought the high shelf up a little bit? I find that those hi-hats are getting a little bit too intense, so I'll just bring that back down to where it was, maybe bring it down a bit. Hopefully you can see this. We also have fuzz output gains. We want this to be even more fuzzy on top of just adding in some extra input volume, so we have that control there as well. Another preset I really like is called Slot Machine. I think if we increase the volume here, we get like a sort of hangy thing happening on the snare. Kick on, bring the clap in. On this preset, if you listen closely, it's got an LFO on there. And this is how quickly it's sweeping right here. And we could also change the behavior of that LFO, sweeping very quickly, as you can see here. Or we could slow it down. Slow it way down. So anyway, I think that you get the idea of the concept of this video. Drop a like or a subscribe, maybe leave a comment if you have any questions or comments. I'm happy to respond. Thanks for being here and hope to see you in the next one.